At some point, you stop asking what something costs. You ask whether you can afford not to think about the cost at all. Imagine waking up tomorrow and money has stopped being a constraint. Not because you won the lottery, not because someone deposited $1 billion into your account. You simply have enough. Enough that the house you want is affordable. The car you want is affordable. The vacation you want is affordable. If you don't want to cook, someone else cooks. If you don't want to drive, someone else drives. If you want to leave the country tomorrow morning, you leave. And if something costs $100,000, your first reaction isn't panic. It's whether you actually want it. That is what most people mean when they say they want to live like a billionaire. But here's the strange part. You probably don't need $1 billion. You might not even need 100 million. The number required to live a billionaire-style life is surprisingly smaller. Because there's a difference between owning $1 billion and spending money like someone who has $1 billion. And once you separate those two things, the math gets very interesting. So let's build the lifestyle from the ground up. You're 35. You make good money. You've already done something most people never manage to do. You've accumulated $5 million. That sounds enormous. It is enormous. You could stop working today and, if you were careful, live an extremely comfortable life. But you walk into your house and look around. It's nice. Very nice. 4 bedrooms, a beautiful kitchen, a pool, a quiet neighborhood. The kind of house your friends would describe as making it. But then you start wondering what billionaire living actually means. So you upgrade. Your first decision is the house. Not a mansion with 30 bedrooms. That's not necessary. You want something that feels like money without becoming a full-time job. A $10 million home, 5 or 6 bedrooms, a large kitchen, a pool, a private office, a gym, a guest house, a beautiful view, a huge yard, a garage that actually has room for the cars you own. You don't need to buy the house outright. You could finance part of it. But if you're trying to reproduce the financial feeling of billionaire living, you don't want a mortgage hanging over your head. So let's say you buy it for $10 million in cash, and immediately something interesting happens. You've spent more money on a house than most people will earn in their entire lives, and yet you haven't done anything billionaire-like. You just bought a very expensive house. The real cost begins after the purchase. Property taxes, insurance, maintenance, landscaping, pool maintenance, utilities, repairs, staff. A house this large doesn't behave like a normal house. It behaves like a small business. You need people to keep it functioning. A housekeeper, a gardener, someone for maintenance, maybe a chef, maybe someone who manages the property when you're traveling. Suddenly, your $10 million house costs several $100,000 a year just to exist at the level you've chosen. And you haven't left the driveway yet. Now comes transportation. You could buy one expensive car, but billionaire-style living isn't really about one expensive car. It's about never having to think about transportation. You have a comfortable daily car, a luxury SUV, maybe a sports car for weekends, maybe a classic car because you like it, maybe another vehicle at your second home. And you don't want to drive every time. So you hire a driver, not because you can't drive, because your time has become more valuable than the inconvenience of driving yourself. That distinction matters. At ordinary income levels, you save money by doing things yourself. At extreme wealth levels, you start paying money to buy back time. The driver isn't transportation, the driver is another hour of your life. Now imagine the same thing happening everywhere. You don't clean the house, someone else does. You don't mow the lawn, someone else does. You don't spend Saturday afternoon waiting for a repair technician, someone handles it. You don't spend 2 hours comparing hotels, someone researches the options and puts 3 choices in front of you. This is where billionaire living starts becoming less about luxury objects and more about removing friction. And that's a much more expensive form of luxury. Now let's talk about travel. This is where the number starts getting ridiculous. You could fly first class everywhere. That already puts you into a lifestyle most people will experience only occasionally. But billionaire-style travel doesn't necessarily mean owning a private jet. It means having the option. You could charter a jet when you need it. No airline schedule, no connecting flights, no security line, no waiting 3 hours in an airport because your flight was delayed. You arrive when you want to leave. For a family or group, a private charter can cost several $1,000s for a single trip. Do that several times a year, and you're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then there's the other thing wealthy people eventually discover. You don't just travel more, you stay longer. A normal vacation might be 7 days. When time isn't the problem, you stay for 3 weeks. You rent an incredible villa. You bring the family. You bring help if necessary. You don't spend the last 2 days thinking about the flight home, because you don't have to. Now imagine doing that 5 or 6 times a year. You've just created a travel budget larger than many people's retirement savings, and you're not even close to billionaire territory. Now we reach the part nobody puts in the Instagram picture. People, the staff. This is one of the biggest differences between being rich and living extremely rich. At a certain level, you stop buying objects and start buying systems. A personal assistant, house manager, chef, driver, cleaning staff, gardener, financial advisor, accountant, lawyer, security professionals when necessary. A person who coordinates all the other people. None of these people are individually extraordinary expenses compared to a billion-dollar fortune. But together, they create a machine, and that machine can easily cost hundreds of thousands of dollars every year, maybe more. And here's what makes it strange. You don't wake up feeling richer because you hired these people. You wake up feeling less busy. That's the product. Time. Now let's say your annual lifestyle costs. $500,000 for the house and property, $200,000 for transportation and drivers, $500,000 for travel, $500,000 for staff, $200,000 for dining, entertainment, and experiences, $100,000 for clothing, technology, and miscellaneous spending. You've already crossed $2 million a year, and you haven't bought a yacht. You don't own a private jet. You don't own a private island. You don't have a collection of supercars. You're simply living a life where money removes most ordinary inconveniences. Now you're spending around $2 million a year. So here's the question. How much money would you need to do this forever? This is where people make the first mistake. They think, I spend $2 million a year, so I need $2 million in income. No. You need assets. Because if your money is invested and generating returns, your lifestyle can be funded by the machine instead of by your labor. Imagine you have $50 million invested, and purely as a simplified illustration, that portfolio generates an average 4% return over a long period. That's $2 million, your entire lifestyle. You haven't touched the original $50 million. You are living on the output. And suddenly, the question changes. You don't need $1 billion to spend like someone with $1 billion. You need enough capital that your lifestyle can be supported by the capital itself. But $50 million isn't the whole story, because real life doesn't produce a perfectly smooth 4% every year. Markets fall. Taxes exist, properties need repairs, travel gets expensive, you have children, you make mistakes, you buy things you didn't plan to buy, so you want a margin. Maybe your lifestyle costs $2 million, but you don't want to build a system that requires exactly $2 million every year. You want the machine producing more than you spend. That is where wealth becomes something different. You stop thinking about what you can buy, you start thinking about what your assets can safely produce. Now let's go bigger. Suppose you want to live like an even more extravagant billionaire. A $20 million home, multiple properties, several cars, a full-time household team, frequent private aviation, luxury travel, fine dining whenever you want, large charitable donations, a boat, and enough flexibility that a $500,000 unexpected expense barely registers. Now your annual lifestyle might reach $5 million, maybe $6 million, maybe more. At that point, a $50 million portfolio doesn't give you much breathing room. A $100 million portfolio starts making more sense. At a hypothetical 4% long-term return, that's $4 million a year. Still not enough for a $6 million lifestyle. But at $150 million, that's $6 million. Now you're getting close. And this is the part that should change how you think about billionaire wealth. The billionaire isn't necessarily rich because he can buy a $100 million yacht. He's rich because a $100 million purchase doesn't fundamentally change his financial position. That's a completely different level of freedom. If you have $10 million and spend $5 million on a house, you changed your life. If you have $1 billion and spend $5 million on a house, you barely change the equation. That is what the billion-dollar number actually buys. Not nicer food, not better clothes, not a bigger television. It buys insignificance. At $1 billion, amounts that would change another person's life become rounding errors. $100,000? Nothing. $1 million? A small percentage. $10 million? Still only 1%. That is the psychological difference, and it explains something strange about billionaire lifestyles. The expensive objects aren't actually the impressive part. The impressive part is the lack of financial consequence. Imagine someone offers you a dinner. It costs $2,000. You can afford it. That's rich. Now imagine they tell you it costs $20,000. And your first question isn't whether you can afford it, it's whether the dinner's worth your time. That is billionaire level thinking. The price has stopped being the primary variable. But there's another side to this, because once you have enough money, the things that used to make you feel rich start becoming strangely boring. You can buy the car, so you buy it. Then what? You can buy the watch, so you buy it. Then what? You can stay at the best hotel. Then what? You can fly privately. Then what? The human brain adjusts. The first luxury feels extraordinary. The 10th becomes normal. The 100th becomes background. And this is why billionaire living isn't necessarily the fantasy people imagine. You might spend millions a year and still have the same arguments with your spouse, the same bad habits, the same worries about your children, the same question about what you're supposed to do tomorrow morning. Money can remove financial problems. It cannot automatically give your life meaning. And that is why the final calculation is more interesting than the number itself. Let's say you don't want the extreme version. You don't need a yacht. You don't need a private jet sitting outside your house. You don't need 20 employees. You simply want the feeling people imagine when they picture billionaire life. A beautiful home, excellent food, luxury travel, a few great cars, help around the house, complete freedom over your schedule, the ability to handle almost any reasonable expense without worrying. That lifestyle might cost somewhere around $1 million to $2 million a year, depending on where you live and how extravagant you become. If you want a large margin and don't want your lifestyle dependent on your ability to keep earning, you're looking at something like $30 million to $50 million of investable wealth. That's the surprising answer. Not $1 billion. Tens of millions. And if you want the truly extravagant version, where private aviation, multiple properties, yachts, large staff, and extremely high annual spending become normal, you're moving toward $100 million or more. But here's the number I want you to remember. Not 1 billion, not 100 million. The number that matters is the amount of capital required to fund the life you actually want without requiring you to keep selling your time, because that's the real definition of financial freedom. Imagine you have $3 million. You don't live like a billionaire, but maybe your investments cover your basic expenses. You have choices. At $10 million, your choices get wider. At $25 million, your life can become extraordinarily comfortable. At $50 million, you can live at a level most people would describe as unimaginably wealthy. At $100 million, money becomes almost irrelevant to ordinary lifestyle decisions. And at $1 billion, you're no longer solving the problem of how to live. You're solving the problem of what to do with excess. That's a completely different problem. And maybe that's the most important distinction in this entire story. Most people think the goal is to become rich enough to buy everything, but the deeper goal is to become wealthy enough that you don't need to buy everything. You don't need the biggest house. You need a house you love. You don't need 10 cars. You need transportation that works. You don't need a private jet. You need control over your time. You don't need people to see that you're wealthy. You need the freedom that wealth creates when nobody's looking. Because the billionaire lifestyle isn't really about the yacht. It's about being able to say no. No to the job you hate. No to the schedule someone else gives you. No to the purchase you don't want. No to the person demanding your time. No to the financial emergency that would destroy someone else's year. That's the luxury underneath all the other luxuries. choice. And here's the strange part. You can start buying pieces of that freedom long before you ever become a millionaire. You can buy back an hour by automating a task. You can buy back stress by building an emergency fund. You can buy back future time by investing today. You can buy flexibility by keeping your expenses below your income. You can buy independence by owning assets instead of only earning wages. You don't need $1 billion to begin living differently. You need enough money that your life stops being controlled by every dollar that enters it. Because at some point, wealth stops being about what you can afford. It becomes about what you no longer have to worry about. And that's the part nobody puts in the picture of a billionaire. The private jet is visible. The yacht is visible. The mansion is visible. The freedom isn't. So if you ever find yourself wondering how much money you would need to live like a billionaire, don't start with the billionaire. Start with your life. What would you actually want? What would you remove? What would you outsource? Where would you live? How much would you travel? How much would you need every year to feel completely comfortable? Then work backward, because the number might be much smaller than you think. You may never need $1 billion. You may never want $1 billion. And you might discover that the life you imagined requiring $1 billion could actually be built with a fraction of it. The real goal was never to own $1 billion. It was to reach the point where money stopped deciding what your life could be. And that number is different for everyone. The question isn't how much money would you need to live like a billionaire. The better question is how much money would you need to live like yourself, completely free? Because once you know that number, you finally know what you're building toward.